Welcome to another episode of Rectec Reels. I'm Henna Makwana, Commercial Success Manager here at Rectec, and joining me today is Simon from Havas People, and we're going to be talking about inclusivity in the recruitment process. So before we dive in, Simon, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi Heather. Lovely to be here today having a talk about inclusivity. I'm the business director for Engage ATS, which is Havas People's applicant tracking system. But my background's been in recruitment, so I've been an early years recruiter for years. I've managed other recruitment platforms as well, and kind of the whole inclusivity, diversity, inclusion piece is something that I've been really interested in and passionate about for years. So happy to talk about it with you today.
Amazing. And it's also something I've been passionate about as well. So really, really happy to be talking about this with you. So safe to say you're an industry expert with the amount of experience that you've had within the recruitment industry. So my first question is, where do you see recruiters making the most mistakes when it comes to inclusivity within the recruitment process?
I've seen lots of different things over the years, ranging from you know managers often recruiting in their own image. I think that's probably the biggest kind of mistake that I've seen, or they kind of have this confirmation bias where they think they know what they're looking for, or they want somebody who's like Mary or who's like Johnny in the team because they've identified that they are high performers or they do well, and therefore to get somebody else who's going to do the job equally as well as them, they have to match their traits or kind of match their backgrounds. And I've seen that time and time again, particularly in the early career space. It's definitely shifted. There's been lots of positive change happening around kind of being more open-minded and kind of diversifying the candidates that are coming in and looking at skills rather than the backgrounds of people. But yeah, I mean that's definitely probably the biggest one that I've seen. But I've also seen things that actually sound quite simple. So overcomplicating the recruitment process, or not explaining the reason why you're asking candidates to go through the stages that they're going through.
Sure.
Assessment's another big one. So I've seen lots of people using the wrong type of assessment tools, or using assessment tools simply to kind of get the numbers down, particularly in kind of volume recruitment where you're trying to get from a couple thousand down to a couple hundred. I've definitely got examples of clients that I won't mention, who have implemented tests just to simply, funnel that number down, but actually you're losing great candidates in the process. We know that assessment tools can have a really big adverse impact on particular groups of candidates. And oftentimes the testing tools that they're using aren't actually fit for purpose or fit for the role that the candidate's actually applying for. So yeah, they're probably the biggest and most common mistakes that I've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more from the kind of the first point you made. I think the first thing that I do as a person of color is look at the careers page and see if there's anything on the socials about that might imply there's people like me that work there, and that would or obviously very happy at Rectec, but historically would have absolutely prevented me from applying from a position or pursuing a role in that company. I don't think people think about that as much. But also going back to the point you made about assessments, I remember distinctly my brother was going for a position, and not only was the assessment tool that they use, I'm not going to name it, like unnecessary for the role that he was going for, but it was completely and utterly not user friendly. Like the way that the text was formatted, everything about it. And as someone who works in recruitment technology, I was horrified. So exactly what you're saying there, I've experienced that firsthand. So you made some really good points there. So with that in mind, how do you think recruiters could start to rectify this?
I think you need to have a really holistic kind of view of your entire end-to-end process, and as you mentioned, the tools that you're using. So make sure that the tools are the right tools. So for me, it starts off with the kind of advertising of your vacancies, the language that you're using in your job descriptions. There's huge amounts of research out there now that will kind of show you that particular words will have a particular bias towards a certain group. So there's lots of words that are considered to be male dominated, female dominated. There's words that actually will lean towards a particular race over others. And oftentimes, we as individuals don't necessarily know, we don't have the full understanding contextually of kind of what all of these words might mean, or the relevance or significance that they might have to a particular group, or the triggers they might have to a
Sure.
particular group as well. I mean, I once saw an advert that had the word slave in it. And it was used in the sense of like, we don't want you to be a slave to the job kind of
Yeah.
thing. But so I got the sentiment, I got the idea of what they were trying to convey. But just the word alone is loaded with
Yeah.
such historical kind of trauma that that alone could turn people off.
Yeah.
It certainly
Absolutely.
made me go like, oh,
Yeah.
it
Well,
had
I
an
just did when you
impact.
mentioned
Yeah,
that. So
it's visceral, isn't it? You just kind of go, oh, well, I don't know how I feel about that. And that changes then how you feel about an organization.
yeah.
And feeling is the most important thing. So I've always talked about this throughout my entire time as an early careers recruiter, but even kind of in managing tech platforms, recruitment really is about how you make someone feel.
Yeah.
As a
Absolutely.
as a candidate, do they feel like they can do the job? Well, that comes again down to the language that you use in your
Mhm.
job description. Is it packed full of jargon that people go, oh, I don't really understand what that
Yeah.
means? But actually, there's a far simpler way of saying
Yeah.
it that would connect with somebody in a much more impactful way. So yeah, that's definitely one part of it. Looking at the recruitment process itself, how can you remove bias creeping into the selection process? So things like anonymized recruitment,
Mhm.
certainly in the the platform that I manage, that's something that we've implemented along with bias detection for kind of job descriptions. But it's just making sure that whoever's looking at that application is focusing on the right things, and not kind of
Mhm.
having their judgment clouded, even subconsciously,
Yeah.
by seeing something that might make them think, hang on a second, oh, they went to that university.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I knew someone who went to that university and they weren't the brightest spark in the world.
Yeah.
It's all those things that are deep within our subconscious that we don't even know that we're necessarily doing.
Yeah.
And like I mentioned earlier, it's also that kind of positive bias or confirmation
Mm.
bias going, I know exactly what it is that I'm looking for. I can tell within the first couple
Yeah.
of minutes because they've said X, or they look a certain way, or they remind me of somebody that used to
Mhm.
work here. So it's removing all of those kind of elements from your process. And then finally, it's well, two other things. It's utilizing, I think, video content to really showcase your organization. You made a really great point earlier that, you as a person of color, you're looking to see, well, am I going to be the only one there?
Yeah.
I've certainly done it. I can tell you stories of friends who do the same thing.
Yeah.
You want to be able to see that there is other representation there, and that you
Of
are
course.
represented, and that you're not going to be the only one. And I think,
Mhm.
particularly if you come from a diverse background, I think maybe even more so an ethnically diverse background, you're very conscious of being the only
Yeah.
one,
Oh,
the token
absolutely.
one. And you want to know that, if a company is reaching out to you or they're talking about diversity, it's not just kind of performative, but it's actually real, it's
Yeah.
genuine, it's authentic, and that, their workforce does represent,
Yeah.
what society looks like, and they do have different people there.
Yeah. Exactly.
And even if they're not at the end of that journey, even if they're at the beginning of that journey, that they're authentically showcasing to you that they are an inclusive employer, and they can
Yeah.
tell you the things that they're doing to
Yeah.
make people feel welcomed and included there. And then the last thing is just around the onboarding piece as well. Once you've made your offer and you found your star candidates, that's only half the battle.
Yeah. Of course.
Making sure that you onboard them into your organization, and you make them feel again included, and a part of that organization long before they ever kind of get to that first day and
Mhm.
and sit down at their desk, whether it's at home or within an office space. That's also really important about how you make people feel, and how
Yeah.
included they feel in your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. You've made some really, really bang on points there. And throughout that, I've got nothing to add. I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the
Right.
head there. An absolute pro. So just to wrap up then, what advice would you give to any recruiters that are actually looking at their end-to-end recruitment process, including onboarding, and are thinking, right, we've got to make this more inclusive? What advice would you give to them?
Go back to the feeling piece again. Think about how your process will make candidates feel. You know, get user feedback, look, job descriptions, get people to have a look at those job descriptions, before you put them out there, to kind of, just sense check that there isn't anything in there that you've inadvertently overlooked. But all the way through that process, think about the feeling, think about, is this application form too long for somebody who's got limited time? Will they be able to complete this, quickly, or will they see that and think, do you know what, I really like that role, but I just haven't got time to do a 3-page, application form, or I haven't got time to write a cover letter that actually isn't really needed for the role, that you're going for. So yeah, think about the kind of the feeling element of it. And the second thing I would say is, utilize technology.
Yeah.
There are so many fantastic platforms out there now that are able to help support you with things like language in job descriptions. I mentioned earlier we use a tool called Cortexter, but there are lots of other tools out there in the market that will help you do exactly the same thing. They will use their kind of the research and kind of wealth of data that they have to be able to detect whether words have a particular bias leaning towards one group or another, and even suggest other words that you could use instead, that can help make that job description more neutral. And again, when it comes to the actual selection process, there are lots of assessment tools out there now that are doing fantastic work, in the inclusion space, and kind of really focusing on the skills that are needed for a role, rather than things like where you went to university, or work experience, and those kind of old school, I guess, metrics that people have used in the past to kind of assess on. So definitely look at the different technology providers that are out there, because they can really help to, one, make your candidate experience far better, but two, help you to remove those elements of bias in your process, wherever possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's really good points there. And just on that, if you are in the market for a new ATS or CRM, then absolutely take advantage of our unique and fee-free comparison tool, Rectec Compare. Or if you're looking to build out your tech stack with complementary tech, such as exactly as you said, some assessment tools or diversity focus tools as well, then be sure to check out our marketplace at rectech.io. But thank you so much for joining me today, Simon, and making some incredible points on inclusivity within the recruitment process.
Great, thanks for having me.